The Curious Case of Kaspar Hauser. A couple of years ago, I was contacted by a lovely colleague of mine, Walther Parson, who's at the Institute of Legal Medicine in Innsbruck. He was asking if I wanted to be involved in a case. Now, Walter's an old friend and renowned for working on high-profile cases, so this was an easy yes. But he didn't tell me what the case was about, and I would have to sign a non-disclosure agreement before anything could be discussed with me. And even then, I wouldn't be told the full case until after the work was done. What he did tell me was that it was going to be a high-profile case. After we did the work, he told me it was the Kasper-Hauser case, and it turns out he wasn't kidding about how famous it is. It's claimed to be one of the biggest historical mysteries of the 19th century. So what's the story, and where does DNA come into this? Okay, so let me take you back to Whit Monday, May 26, 1828, when a young lad turns up on the streets of Nuremberg, seemingly from nowhere. He was thought to be around 16 years old, was in generally good health, but could barely walk or speak and didn't like bright sunlight. He carried a letter addressed to the captain of a cavalry regiment. This letter apparently from an anonymous individual who said that the boy had been given into his custody in 1812, and since then he had apparently been the boy's caretaker and had kept him in total isolation. Another letter Kaspar had on him was apparently from his mother, addressed to the stranger who took him in, saying that Kaspar's father was a cavalryman who had died and she was too poor to look after him. Now, according to Kaspar, as long as he could remember, he lived in a small, dark dungeon completely alone. He had just 3 toys to play with, 2 horses and a dog, all made of wood. He said he was provided with bread and water, but didn't see the person who brought it. Now, the thinking was that there must have been opium in his drinking water because while he was asleep from the effects of the drug, someone was looking after his hygiene, such as cutting his hair and nails. Not long before he was released, a man appeared, who took care not to reveal his face to Kaspar, but who taught him how to repeat a few phrases. For example, "I would like to become such a writer as my father was," and taught him how to walk and to write the name Kaspar Hauser. After that, the man walked him to Nuremberg, where he left him. Although it seemed pretty clear that Kaspar Hauser wasn't his real name, that was the name he continued to use and that he became known by. Well, Kaspar became a bit of an international sensation, and in the following months, he was examined by doctors, and taking into account his limited speech and walking when he first appeared, and his subsequent development, it was thought he must have been put into isolation from the age of about 3 to 4 years. While many thought that the whole story of him being kept in a dungeon was a bit far-fetched and that he may be a fraud, many distinguished individuals took him into their care, and he became a bit of a celebrity with visitors to Nuremberg hoping to get a glimpse of him, and he featured in the newspapers in Germany. As you can imagine, rumors began to swirl around his unusual story and as to his possible origins, including one that maybe he was of noble birth. And this was the start of the hereditary prince theory for Kaspar Hauser. Now, to explain this, you're gonna have to stay with me because there are 3 people called Karl over a family tree of 4 generations. So I'm gonna call them Karl 1, 2, and 3 to distinguish them. You may need to go look up this family tree to understand this, and to complicate things, you'll see that on some websites, they go by the English version of the name, which is Charles. But from here on in, I'm going to be using the name Karl. The theory was that Kaspar was actually the son of Karl, Grand Duke of Baden, and his wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais. I'm going to refer to this as Karl III. He's the youngest of the Karls, and he was the son of Karl II, who was the son of Karl I. Still with me? More about Karl I in a bit. Now, Karl III and Stephanie had had a baby son, apparently born healthy on September the 29th, 1812, and who, had he survived, would have been the hereditary Prince of Baden, and would have later replaced his father, Karl III, as Duke. Unfortunately, though, The baby boy died just over 2 weeks later, and because Karl III himself died just 6 years later without any male heirs, he was succeeded by his uncle Ludwig. English form is Louis, the younger brother of his father, Karl II. Now then, Karl II and Ludwig were the sons of Grand Duke Karl Frederick. He's Karl number 1. Karl I married twice. Karl II and Ludwig were from his first marriage. His second wife was Louise Caroline Geyer von Geyersberg. Now, Louise was considered to be of a lower rank to Karl I. So it was proclaimed that any children she had with him would not be recognized as being of dynastic rank, and that any male children from her marriage could not take on the title of duke unless all the male line descendants of Karl I's first marriage had died. Well, what do you know, but that's what's happened. And Louise's eldest son with Karl I, Leopold, became Grand Duke after Ludwig died. This whole turn of events got people thinking. People started saying that Louise, to ensure one of her kids would be Grand Duke, had dressed up as a ghost, the White Lady, kidnapped Karl III and Stephanie's baby son out of his crib and replaced him with a dying baby of one of her servants. The swapped-in baby then dies and is buried as the prince, while the true prince actually survived, and Kaspar was now that young prince as a teenager. This rumor gained even more traction when, in October 1829, Kaspar was found in the cellar of the house he was staying in a pool of blood with a cut wound on his forehead. Kaspar said he had been attacked by the man who had brought him to Nuremberg, who told him that he would have to die before he could leave the city. Some saw this as further proof that he must be a person of significant interest, such as the true prince. But it's important to note that at this point, Kaspar was getting into arguments with the man who was looking after him, schoolmaster Friedrich Dahmer, after Dahmer's suspicions grew that Kaspar had a tendency to lie. So some people suggested that Kaspar had orchestrated this story as a distraction to gain more attention and sympathy. Okay, well, it certainly worked, because after this, the King of Bavaria, Ludwig I, ordered that henceforth Kaspar was to be guarded around the clock, which only added to the speculation that Kaspar must be of political importance. The authorities gave Kaspar a police escort to somewhere thought to be safer, in the home of Johann Biberback, one of the municipal authorities. Then, a few months later, in this new home, Kaspar is found with a slight head wound, apparently from a gunshot. This time after supposedly falling from standing on a chair, and by mistake grabbing a pistol which was hanging on the wall and firing a shot on the way down. Again, there had been issues with the Biberback family being concerned about Kaspar lying, and so it's thought that maybe Kaspar engineered this as another distraction. Needless to say, all this created a bit of a sensation, and the English aristocrat, Lord Stanhope, intrigued by the rumors of Kaspar's potential noble origin, became his benefactor and transferred him to the care of a schoolmaster called Johann Meyer in Ansbach. Stanhope all but adopted him, paying his living expenses and spending large amounts of money trying to find out his identity and intending to have him come and live in England. But he, too, began to doubt Kaspar's credibility, and the relationship began to sour. Kaspar's relationship with Meyer was also strained, again with Meyer not happy with Kaspar's apparent lying. It all came to a head in December 1833, when Kaspar and Meyer had a huge argument, and a few days later Kaspar arrived home with a wound in his chest, having apparently been stabbed by an unknown assailant in the palace gardens in Ansbach. He died 3 days later. Some say he was murdered. Others say it was an accidental death from a self-inflicted injury. He was buried in the city cemetery in Ansbach, his tombstone carved with, in Latin, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, the riddle of his time. His birth was unknown, his death mysterious." Later, another monument was erected on the spot where he was stabbed in the court garden, carved with, "Here a mysterious man was killed in a mysterious way." There is a museum in Kasper-Hauser-Platz, the square named for Kasper, where the blood-stained clothes he was found in, the 2 letters, and some of his personal belongings are exhibited. A monument to him, known as the Child of Europe, was erected in 1981, which is one of the tourist attractions of the town and shows up on various travel guide websites. In 2013, the 180th anniversary of Kasper's death, the sculptor Ottmar Horl made 150 sculptures of Kasper and placed them around the city, and Ansbach holds a Kasper-Hauser festival every few years, complete with its own website. Alongside the numerous books, there are various films about the case, including the 1974 documentary thriller directed by famed German filmmaker Werner Herzog, The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser. The case of Kaspar Hauser is even alluded to in Blade Runner 2049. In the world of science, there's something known as a Kasper-Hauser experiment, where an animal is reared in isolation to find out which behaviors are innate. And in psychiatry, there's a Kasper-Hauser syndrome, which is a psychological condition characterized by social and intellectual deficiencies, which is due to abuse or isolation in childhood. In short, Kaspar Hauser is pretty darn famous. Okay, so it's a big mystery. Was Kaspar actually the Prince of Baden? Well, these days we can try to answer that question using DNA. Can we get the DNA from any of Kaspar's items, such as his hair or blood from the clothing, and compare it with somebody from the Duke of Baden's family to see if there's a match? Well, in the last 25 years, multiple genetic analyses have been carried out to investigate this possible aristocratic origin. The bit of DNA they, and we, targeted for the analysis was mitochondrial DNA for a number of reasons. To remind you, mitochondrial DNA is passed down through the female line. So if Kaspar was really Stephanie de Beauharnais' son, then he would have inherited her mitochondrial DNA. And any living female line relatives of Stephanie would also have identical or near identical mitochondrial DNA as her. In the mid-1990s, DNA from the bloodstain from the underwear that Kaspar was wearing from the incident in 1833 was compared against the mitochondrial DNA of female line descendants of 2 of Stephanie's daughters. They looked at 2 sections of the mitochondrial DNA in what's known as the control region. This is a section of DNA that is known to have more variation among the population, where we expect people to differ if they aren't related through the female line, and so has been used in cases like this. This study didn't find a DNA match between Kaspar and Stephanie's descendants, but just to confuse things, in 2001-2002, tests done on 2 lots of hair samples, one from when he was alive and one from after he died, swabs from the trouser bloodstain and from a hat gave varying different results, and though some of those were not a perfect match, they didn't exclude Kaspar from being maternally related to Stephanie. The results were never published scientifically. To break the stalemate, and because there's new technologies these days, we carried out new DNA testing on both ante- and post-mortem hair samples using 2 different methods: primer extension capture, which was used to capture the control region of the mitochondrial DNA, and also massively parallel sequencing, which allowed us to get near 100% coverage of the mitochondrial genome. And we did the work in 2 separate labs, each using a different method alongside the use of blind samples, where we were also given a sample that was nothing to do with the case, and we had no idea which was the Kaspar sample. So basically, different samples were analyzed by different labs and by different methods. We got really clear results. The DNA from Kaspar Hauser was the same across the hair samples and also matched the blood sample analysis of the 1990s. The mitochondrial DNA type that we found for him is known as haplogroup W, which is a West Eurasian mitochondrial DNA type. We calculated an upper limit of 1 in 410 that a randomly selected person of the West Eurasian population would be haplogroup W. We know that the 3 relatives of Stephanie, descendants of 2 of her daughters, as well as a descendant of Stephanie's great-grandmother, all shared the H1BS mitochondrial DNA type, so it doesn't match the samples from Kaspar. We calculated that we can therefore exclude Kaspar as being Stephanie's son with a probability of 99.9994%. We started this study asking if DNA could finally answer the question as to whether Kaspar was the Prince of Baden. And from the DNA analysis, we can say with a very high probability that Kaspar was not related to Stephanie and so not the Prince of Baden. What we can't answer is who was Kaspar. Using mitochondrial DNA, we can't say much more than he is of West Eurasian ancestry on his maternal side, but we cannot narrow it down to a particular region. We also don't want people to take from the research that it is evidence for the theory that Kaspar was a fraud and that he completely made up the story of his past. We cannot rule out that he may have been a victim of some sort of crime, such as kidnapping or child abuse. At the end of all of this, the true identity of Kaspar Hauser remains a mystery.